second module in the seminar entitled The Initiatic Mysteries of Classical Antiquity, we're going to consider the characteristics of the initiatic mysteries. Now, we have talked about the evolution of initiation as a human institution. In ancient times, or in primitive tribes, we find that initiation is mainly a transition that is brought from childhood into adulthood and the full responsibilities of adulthood. And it's usually done at puberty. However, we found that in what we call the Taurian period, the period in which the ancient mysteries of the Egyptians were developed and so on, that special initiation into shamanic mysteries, into the spirit world, for those who would become ministers to their tribe or their people, or for kings or for shaman kings, were developed. In the Greek religion, we spoke of Pan, the ancient god of the all, the old religion. And it was into that form of understanding nature and the ancestors and communication with the ancestors that shamanic initiation was developed for a special few who showed the talent, sometimes came through the right families and so on. And that involved the training and initiation, very often, of priest kings. We talked about Melchizedek, the king of righteousness, the shamanic tradition that underlies the ancient Hebrew and probably the entire Semitic shamanic and prophetic tradition, and the priests and priestesses of Egypt, and later we would speak of the oracular priestesses of Delphi. Finally, during the Aryan period, we came to a time when individuals who were considered to be ethically, morally fit, who had the correct character and integrity, would be invited by other initiates into the inner circle of the high initiatic mysteries, the mystery religions. They were called Mistai, and they were initiated into the religions. These were the Eleusinian and the Pythagorean and the Thraic and Jewish, Christian, and so on. And we find even the same kind of pattern existing in ancient Semitic and Israeli circumcision rites, which were done no longer at puberty, but on the 8th day after birth. So now it is time to ask, what is initiation? I'm going to give you one definition of what we would call spiritual initiation, and this is the form of initiation that we are speaking of, which is a ritualistic and sacramental admission of carefully selected initiands into a protected circle. And it is a protected circle. It's protected by secrecy and by powerful spiritual forces. A protected circle of spiritual practitioners or initiates. Initiates are practitioners of certain things that they have been given authority to practice through their lineage. Now, we have different kinds of practices and different formats for practices that are done after spiritual initiation in the Eastern spiritual tradition and in the Western initiatic tradition. In the Eastern traditions, developed to their highest point, I believe, in the Tibetan Tantras, which came from India and were further refined, involve the induction of a properly qualified initiand into the palace of a deity who is especially understood to be a deity that oversees spiritual initiation. In the Western initiatic tradition, initiation was to be among a brotherhood or a group or of people who extended back through time, through lineage, and were under the direction of a hierarchy of ancestors. Now, the same kind of thing can be found in many Eastern traditions, and as we get farther into the Western tradition, farther towards the modern period, we find very much that the concepts of initiation in East and West diverge. But probably in the earliest periods, they were very, very similar. Initiation confers spiritual energies and powers. Initiates are authorized by a lineage of senior initiates to practice and ripen techniques and knowledge for spiritual and psychic maturation, with the goal of transcending socially established norms and becoming basically what we might call more than human, to eventually achieve what in the Hellenic religions was known as apotheosis, or immortality, through transformation from mortality into immortality. It was to construct and build immortality within the soul of the initiate. And that seed was there to begin with. Just as in Buddhism we say that every human being, every ordinary person, every ordinary being, whether it's even sentient or not, can be understood to have a Buddha nature. Initiates are required to make commitments, and these commitments are commitments very often of practice or of fidelity, of faithfulness. Very unfortunately, in Christianity, the basic commitment of faithfulness or fidelity, which in Aramaic is amen, we get the word amen from that, was misunderstood in Gentile Christianity. Within 50 or 60 years, it became belief, not fidelity. But the word that is used by Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus, and that obtains in all of his teachings is fidelity, the fidelity of a mustard seed, the faithfulness of a mustard seed, which perseveres to against all odds and becomes transforming itself from the smallest of all seeds into the largest and most powerful of all bushes and shrubs. This is a matter of fidelity, not a matter of belief. The mustard seed doesn't believe anything. And this commitment of fidelity in practice and in character and in integrity is also kept by keeping the secrets and the sacred things that are within the circle of initiation. Those things that are sacred to the initiate, be keeping them secret and keeping the sacred things out of the profane world and away from the profane hands of those who don't know enough and don't care enough to value them. Lineage is extremely important. What is lineage? Well, lineage is what we would refer to as the passing down from grandmaster to grandmaster, from guru to guru, or from great shaman to the next great shaman, great prophet to the next great prophet, from Elijah to Elisha. The passing down of not only knowledge, but authority, the divine authority that is the basis of the power that is conferred in initiation to develop and transcend the normal human situation. And that lineage, although it's rooted in shamanic worlds, in ancestor worship and the chain of the great ancestors, that lineage is transmitted in a very formal way. in Tibetan Buddhism. And in Buddhism, we have lineages that can be traced back hundreds and hundreds of years from master to master to master, who passed on his authority to his his finest student. And we have that tradition in Christianity. It's called the apostolic succession, the succession of the apostles, which transmits the divine authority and energies of the master, Yeshua, into the future through a long, long chain of descendants. The mystery schools were more than simply an initiation and then one goes and practices what one learns. The mystery schools continued the education and the development of those who were initiated. It had to do with the transformation, however, of individuals, person by person, soul by soul. Later on, in the West, great initiatic movements like that of the Freemasonry, concern themselves not only with the transformation of the individual, but with the entire social corpus, with the transformation of society. Today there are many conspiracy theorists and theories about the Fratres Lucas and about the Masons and their conspiracy to rule the world. Even in the elections this year with Bush and Kerry, who were initiated into the Skull and Bones Association of Yale. All these groups that initiated people with their very strange rites and emphasis upon death as an emblem of death and time, and the escaping of time as emblems of ways to waste your life, and with the emphasis upon making a contribution and making things, leaving things behind that are worthwhile after one dies, because one doesn't have that much time. These kinds of institutions are extensions of the mystery schools into the social fabric of the country. The main founders of the United States were Freemasons, George Washington, many others whose associations with other Freemasons allowed them to carry out social initiatives that otherwise would have been impossible. Contemporary initiatic traditions range from totally men's organizations and totally women's organizations to high esoteric schools, and sometimes they're not difficult to find or make contact with, but other times they're very much in the background and one has to search hard to find them. It's interesting that the Master Jesus is supposed to have said, "That which I whisper into your ears will be shouted from the housetops." And this is really what has happened in the 21st century, in that all the ancient mysteries and the mysteries of antiquity, including many of the things that I will be embedding into this seminar and its various modules, are things that were high secrets and things that could not be uttered and that were unknown to society. These things are all now revealed. And they're revealed because, like a seed that has germinated and produced its fruit, it's ready to create a whole new generation of things bearing seeds within themselves. So we have quite a range of organizations and esoteric schools today, not any of them, however, particularly powerful as they have been in certain societies before. Freemasonry is in great decline in this country, and I and other associates have worked to introduce women to Freemasonry and to bring into the United States Freemasonic forms that initiate women, so that women and men would work together. And we have worked at reviving and reconstituting Freemasonry, but it's a tremendous pressure against us to do such things, and something that will not be accepted for a long time. Here is the emblem of a modern mystery school. This is a Theosophical Society, the Theosophical Organization at Halcyon, California, that was founded by the New York group of Madame Blavatsky in the late 1890s, of which I'm a member. This is an emblem of the Neo-Egyptian type of groups, such as the Servants of Light and some of the other English and British groups that have centered themselves around revivals of Egyptian mysteries. The Brotherhood of Light was founded in the 19th century and contains a great deal of really interesting and important teachings that synthesize much of what existed in the Brotherhood of Luxor and other things that were stood behind the Golden Dawn and other kinds of magical traditions that emerged at that time. And we have not only Golden Dawn and Golden Dawn offshoots, although the Golden Dawn officially came to an end some time ago at the beginning of the 20th century, but has been revived, and many other offshoots of Rosicrucianism, as well as those that have been established in the United States as separate paths, like Amorc. We have Great Western University. Dr. Eugene Whitworth and his wife Ruth established with a large group of people in San Francisco in the mid-20th century, provided extensive training on a framework of Egyptian understanding. We have the Temple of the Holy Grail, which was established later in the 20th century by me and others who worked with me. And these are all contemporary mystery schools that provide some excellent guidance and techniques, although one has to be extremely careful as one works with any of these things, because many of the things that are offered could be misused or used incorrectly or misunderstood, and sometimes the people who are in charge of these things have motives that completely pollute what they're doing. Now, the persistence of the most ancient forms of really shamanic initiation all the way into the modern era for thousands of years is something that amazes scholars who look into it. If you are a Freemason, you know what is involved in the ritual of discalciation and some of the other rituals that are involved in initiation. These are not new things that were invented by people in the 17th or 18th century. These are things we will find attributed to initiation in the very ancient world. For example, in Ovid's Metamorphosis, when Medea is out to heal Jason's father, she goes through a ritual in which she has to transform herself and go through her initiatic self, her initiatic magical self, in order to make the connections deep at night with the forces of the divine underworld that will work with her. Ovid describes her as, quote, arm, breast, and knee made bare, left foot slipshod. One shoe off, one shoe on. If you take a look at the illustration I have here, you'll see she has one sandal off, one sandal on. Very important emblem of initiation. In Virgil's Aeneid, Dido, who has now lost her lover and is going to commit suicide, but as she dies, she will translate herself from the mortal into the immortal realm. And she is described in this way: now resolute on death, having one foot bare. This slipshod thing, evoke part of the breast bear or 1 foot bear. These are ways that people were prepared for initiation in the ancient world that are still being done today, for example, in Freemasonry. So we have a transmission of initiatic conventions that has lasted over 3,000 years, from ancient Hellenic to modern times in Freemasonry. Here you see a person attired for initiation as an apprentice. That's the first degree in Freemasonry. You notice that he is hoodwinked, that is, he's blindfolded. He has a cable tow around his neck, that is a rope that can pull him. He has one side of his breast revealed. In this particular part of initiation, it's the right side of the breast is open and revealed. He has one pant leg rolled up and one pant leg rolled down. And he will also be slipshod in many forms of initiation, or in the second degree, he will have one shoe on and one shoe off. Or in some degrees, in some rituals, he will have both pant legs rolled up in the latter degrees, and no shoes on, and both sides of the chest bare. This is all convention that was not just invented 200 or 300 years ago. It's been carried down in initiatic traditions. We're going to look at how that happened later on. Now, one of the things that I have found to be fascinating, and when I made my trip to Rosslyn Chapel near Edinburgh, Scotland, a few years ago, I took extensive video and pictures of the carvings in the chapel, because it shows things in the chapel that are at least 200 years before the supposed origins of Freemasonry as we know it today in 17th century England. And here's one of the carvings we have on the wall. To the left is the carving on the wall, to the right is a drawing of what is on the carving when you examine it very carefully. A person with a Templar, Knights Templar cross holds a cable tow around the neck of the initiate, who is hoodwinked. He's blindfolded. He's down on his knees holding a sacred book, undoubtedly the Bible, and he is in the same position as the initiate is for, or rather as the initiand is for initiation into the apprentice degree, the first degree of Freemasonry. And yet this is 200 years before Freemasonry is supposed to have begun. So we have a continuity of the initiatic traditions, even though the names change and the media through which they're transmitted change. We definitely have a continuity of initiatic tradition. We're going to be looking at the Osirian mysteries of Egypt as a kind of transition between the Taurian and Arian mysteries. And then we're going to look in much detail at the Hellenic mysteries, the mysteries of what we call classical antiquity of ancient Greece and the areas around Greece. And the most ancient of them and the most respected of them for the longest period of time were the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, these were nocturnal mysteries. The most sacred parts of them were done at nighttime, under the moon, or under the influence of the divine underworld, which is ruled by Hades and Persephone, or Pluto and Persephone, and under the aegis of some of the goddesses like Hecate. The place where people were initiated was near the great city of Athens, that became the major city of the Grecian areas and tribes. And yet it was very, very difficult to get to. It was high in the mountains through a long, very difficult journey to get to Eleusis and the sanctuary itself. And it was based on and depended upon what I call an ethical, mystical understanding of spirituality and immortality. The basis for apotheosis, that is, for transformation from the mortal into the immortal state, was the integrity and character and the conduct of a person in life. And that is what the essence of the Eleusinian mysteries was. Now we're going to look at the oracular or chthonic mysteries, the mysteries of Pythagoras and Parmenides, the mysteries of the full Archelae, who taught people to lay like a lion in a lair for 3 days and descend into the divine underworld for revelation and for to receive the basic keys to immortality. And we're going to look at the Delphic oracle, the oracle at Delphi, and look at the basis for what this provided and how these people were initiated into their positions. We're going to look at the cults of the great heroes. These were the demigods. These were the humans who were divine. Asclepius or Asclepius, a great healer and physician whose sanctuaries were to be found all over the Greek and later Roman Empire, and were places where people would incubate. They were to go into sleep, and under the guidance of the priests, they would have a vision of the great demigod, who was thought of as a god, Asclepius. And when they awakened, they would be cured. And we have a lot of very interesting things from Epidaurus and other places where these rituals were done. And oracles like that of Trophonius, where people descended by themselves into a deep cave and in order to find answers to things. We'll be looking another module at the institution that was set up for people to speak to their dead ancestors, and so on. We'll be looking at the ecstatic cults of the Great Mother, the Magna Mater, and the Corybantes, and of the Galli, the men who castrated themselves and danced wildly, by the way, whose vestments became very much later models for vestments of the Christian Church, Catholicism. And we'll look at the Dionysian cult and its mysteries, and this is a very deep work, the Dionysian, the Orphic, with its Maenads and its rituals that I'll describe to you later. And we'll look at the philosophic initiatic schools, those that were founded not only by Pythagoras, but by Empedocles and many others, that took people from a state of being a normal human into becoming a philosopher, which was another way of saying a holy person who was a seeker after spiritual truth. We will find always that there are three common elements in all of the mystery religions. The first is known in Greek as ta dromana, the things that are done. And we get the word drama from this because sacred drama is developed from the dramas that were enacted at the time of the great mysteries. The next kind of thing that they have in common are ta lagomena, which literally means the things that are spoken. And these are the myths. For example, in the Eleusinian mysteries, the story of Demeter seeking her kidnapped daughter and all this sort of thing. The myth is the kind of outer window dressing that contains within it clues to what the mysteries are all about. But the myths are known. They're known, they're spoken publicly, etc. They would be comparable to, for example, the four Gospels of Christianity, which are outer legendary accounts for people who are not yet baptized or not yet members of the inner circle. And that was their intent. They were to be read by those who were not in the inner circles, but it was a kind of a evangelical or document that could be shown and talked about to other people. And these are telegomena, the things that are spoken, and then they are explained. They are explained to those in the inner circle. And finally, tadekmumena, which are the things that are shown, the things that are manifested, the things that the Hierophant and the High Priestess show to people, which induce visions, which induce revelations and induce a state of ecstasy. And they look like nothing. We see the things that were shown, for example, in the Eleusinian Mysteries, but under the proper state of preparation, they become a wonderful means for revelation. Much more of this we will talk about later. Now, the mysteries survive in contemporary religion. I'm going to show you a way that they do. We're going to look at the Eleusinian Mysteries and the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. The Eleusinian Mysteries were the mysteries of classical antiquity that were celebrated by the whole city of Athens, and new initiates were brought, or initians were brought forward and trained over periods of several years and initiated one time of the year in September. Rosh Hashanah is a very important celebration in Judaism that goes back to antiquity. And we're going to look at the parallels between the things that are done in Rosh Hashanah and the things that were done in the Eleusinian Mysteries, and I think you're going to be surprised. The website above is a personal website of a person who did the research and made the comparison, and I think did a fine job. I've altered a little bit of what this person put up. But on the left-hand side, you see things associated with the Eleusinian Mysteries. On the right-hand side, things with the Jewish High Holy Days. There was a lighting of torches because that was done, the parts of the ceremonies that were done at nighttime and the sacred orgae, or orgies as they were later called, of the Initians wending their way along the path to the sanctuary, was done with the lighting of torches. In the Jewish High Holy Days, we light candles. Well, that may not seem like too much of an important parallel. But another thing that was done in the Eleusinian Mysteries was purification in the sea, the salt water of the sea, and in which the person washed away from himself those things that were contaminating him. The ceremony of Tashlich is still done today in the Jewish High Holy Days, where people throw bread, they cast their bread upon the waters, and in so doing, release sins and things from them in order to purify them for the holy days. In the Eleusinian Mysteries, they wore white clothing, white robes, white linen cloths. In the Jewish High Holy Days, we wear the white kittel. It was a day in the Eleusinian Mysteries for honoring the dead, the ancestors, as indeed it is in the Jewish High Holy Days. And this time of sacrifices, when actually the holy sacrifice among the Greeks was the pig. And that's what was sacrificed at that time. However, Rosh Hashanah is a time of sacrifices at the time of the temple. Then the animals that were sacred to in Judaism, which were not the pig, were sacrificed. Animal sacrifice was done at that time. Very often in the Eleusinian tradition, a rooster was offered to Asclepius. And in the Jewish High Holy Days, there's an old tradition of offering of roosters by men and hens by women for fertility. Now, this is a very important thing. The preparation and display of baskets, the basket or the kiste, is the chest in which the cult items were kept, which were basically something that we might consider to be like a yoni and a lingam. These baskets were prepared and displayed for the Eleusinian mysteries. On the Jewish High Holy Days, a tradition of braiding baskets for small children about 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah is a very old tradition. Now here we're going to see something interesting. We have a tradition that is an anti-tradition. And we find this a lot between Jewish and Hellenic customs, Jewish and Greek customs. Many Jewish customs and traditions were developed to be the antithesis of what was done by the Greeks, because the Greeks were the archetypal Gentiles. And so therefore, if they sacrificed pigs, the most heinous thing you could do would be to sacrifice a pig, etc. Well, here we have in the Eleusinian mysteries the pomegranate, which is a sacred symbol. And like all totem things, it's prohibited from being consumed at the time of the Eleusinian mysteries, along with apples. However, in the Jewish High Holy Days, specifically apples and pomegranates are eaten and taken for long life. Another anti-tradition, the pig was sacred to Demeter. So the pig is, of course, and pork is taboo in Jewish religion in general. Now, the gifts of the goddess Demeter, wheat, barley, grains, and corn, and she's considered to be the person who has introduced the sciences of farming and grains and so on, are sacred at this time. And in the Jewish High Holy Days, wheat and barley are sown into children's baskets. Now, in the traditions of Eleusis, the beans belonged to the underworld. They were legumes that grew under the ground. And it's interesting that in the High Holy Days, beans were planted in children's baskets. The red cord was given as the sign of the initiate. It was called the crocate. However, in the Jewish High Holy Days and in all of Judaism, the red cord was a sign of a holy prostitute. There were many times in ancient Jewish religion where there were sacred prostitutes, just as there were in Egyptian religion, etc. They were priestesses, and they were not considered to be what today a prostitute is considered to be, but to be something more like a nun. And the red cord was the sign of the holy prostitute. Now, during the time that the Eleusinian mysteries were enacted, was a time of hieros gamos, sacred marriage. But weddings, therefore, were prohibited between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The sacred marriage was enacted in the Telesterion between the Hierophant and the High Priestess. However, despite the detractors in Christianity and other places who eventually killed the Eleusinian mysteries, the acts that were performed with them were not intercourse, but other kinds of things of a higher and more spiritual nature. And in the Eleusinian mysteries, a ram was slaughtered for what we call the lesser mysteries of Heracles. And Demeter would sit on a fleece for that. Well, it's interesting that there's the blowing of the ram's horn, the shofar, for Yom Kippur. So the ram is considered to be sacred at that time. Basically, Typically, there are 9 days of ceremony in the Eleusinian mysteries. There are 10 days at exactly the same time of the year in the Jewish High Holy Days. However, the High Holy Days are counted differently from sunset to sunrise. So the actual period of time is the same. And it is a time when offerings are given to the poor among the Greeks for the Eleusinian mysteries, and when charity is exercised, especially by Jewish people at the time of the High Holy Days. It is considered to be the beginning of new and higher and ethical life, initiation in the mysteries, and it's considered to be the beginning of a new year and a new life, in which the old and the sins of the past are cut away and one has a new start in the Jewish High Holy Days. So you see, many of the traditions and many of the ideas and many of the archetypal patterns that existed in the ancient world have been transmitted completely unknowingly and without any intention, have been brought forward, because that is the way spiritual and religious traditions transmit themselves through human culture. So now what we're going to do is take a look at the stages of initiation in the initiatic mysteries. And the first stage, which is that of preparation and probation, may include any of the things listed above, and usually most of them. Studying and receiving teachings. The mysti are guided by the mystagogue or by the person who has nominated them, and they take vows of secrecy. There is some kind of a process to remove defilement of purification. There's a confession and washings in water, which we call illustration, or baptism, or mikvah, or other purification by water. Sacrifices are offered in the ancient world. Prolonged fast, sexual abstinence, different kinds of ascetic preparations are made. Sometimes pilgrimages of a penitential nature, that is, pilgrimages in order to burn away karma or to resolve the insufficiencies of a person are made, going through some kind of hardship, and then returning to a sacred site as an act of devotion. Very often, people are given a new name. All Christians, for example, were given their Christian name, which very often end up being names of saints and things like that. There were reading of sacred books and scriptures, sometimes learning of foreign expressions or secret formulas. In the Eleusinian mysteries, there was a formula that was learned and that was spoken, and so on. Very often dancing or pantomimic dancing. There was what we had to have beautiful choric dancing in the Eleusinian mysteries, led by a little child would lead them. There were silences, periods of silences. People were veiled, or they put on new clothes. They wore white. They offered incense. Believe it or not, certain kinds of sounds are made, very often roaring like certain kinds of animals. And this belies the ancient origins of the mysteries in shamanistic and totemistic spiritual practice. Masks were worn, very often to take upon oneself the persona of a deity. People drank things, and in the original mysteries of Eleusis, they drank a very mild stimulant tea of pennyroyal, probably. But in the Dionysian mysteries, they drank much stronger substances like alcohol. The initiate might have been crowned or enthroned in some kind of way. This is a painting made by Maria Alquilar of an Afro-Cuban preparation for initiation. And this is an initiation into a form of religion that's much closer to its shamanic roots. Here we see the initiate is laid out as though she were in a tomb, and undergoes a symbolic death after much purification and many other kinds of things. In the second stage, there is initiation itself and communion with the deities, and they may include invocations of the gods, Tediknumena and Tegromena and Tamagamena, the things that are shown and done and said and so on. A regeneration, becoming reborn, entering an abyss, entering the divine underworld, passing from death into life, experiencing a symbolic or voluntary death and burial, and enacting one's own death. A sacred meal is eaten, very often a totem meal, a meal that consists of the flesh and blood of the god, and a sign of recognition and a sign of having been initiated is transmitted, and then a time of thanksgiving. This is Maria Aquilar's painting of the completion of initiation, where the initiate is crowned and dressed as a goddess and a queen and so on, and the totem animals are around, indicating the powers that she has now inherited the right to be able to develop and exercise, and the new birth that she has experienced and so on. Now, the communion and identification with a god or the gods very often involves, in many traditions, altered states, ecstasy, enthusiasms that are induced by vigil and fasting and expectancy, dances, physical stimuli, contemplation of sacred objects, chanting of music, inhalation of fumes, contagion of a revivalist sort of nature, and hallucination and suggestion. There is an ecstasy that is an abnormal consciousness of the exhilaration condition in which the body ceases to be a hindrance of the soul. And it may be passive, as in a trance, or in an orgiastic character of excitement, a divine frenzy. It could be contemplative, or it can be very enthusiastic. And both those forms existed in classical antiquity. The earlier forms, the Eleusinian, were more Apollonian, more contemplative. The later forms, as they developed, the Dionysian and the Magna Mater and so on, were very enthusiastic. They were involving divine frenzy and so on. And the spirit of the gods entered and possessed people. This was the entrance of the Spirit or the Holy Spirit. In Christianity, the same thing was experienced. A second part of that would have been involved in what we might call the ascent of the soul, or the descent of the soul into the divine underworld. It's a reconstruction of the personality by the divine world, receiving a prophecy or revelation or dreams or visions or oracles, revelations embodying God or becoming like the God or identifying or finding unity with the God, a sacred marriage, a hieros gamos, which is considered to be a symbol of the most intimate union known between the mortal and the immortal, between the human and the divine, sometimes literally enacted by a priest and a priestess, a hierophant and a high priestess, an enactment of a symbolic wedding. We talked about sympathia or sympathy before. This is through the orge of the mystery god, an orge, which we think of as an orgy, but really means the divine passion of the god. When Demeter is searching for her daughter, she is on a path of mourning and grieving, and this is a via dolorosa, a path of mourning and weeping that those entering into initiation imitate. Just as people do with Jesus, they go to the 12 stations of the cross and they walk the Via Dolorosa of the Master on his way to crucifixion. And They participate in the sorrows and suffering of the deity, and they repeat in themselves the deity's passion, the passion of the Christ, and so on. And then there are divine services and public services that repeat the experience of initiation, sacred meals, and so on, using the totem sacrifice, taking in the God. This is done in Mithraism and many others, and of course in Christianity. At the very end, however, of the total initiation experience comes the contemplative adoration or meditation at the very end, when all has been done. This is known as the epoptea of the mystery God, or the mystery religions, the vision of blessedness, the visio beatifica. And so the final and immediate result of initiation was to behold an epiphany, a manifestation, a vision of the deity. It could be through vision, dreams, trances, and ecstasy, or hypnotic conditions, but we know that basically, for example, at the conclusion of the Eleusinian mysteries, people sat and contemplated sheaves of grain, in which they saw the vision that we see before us here inscribed on the wall, something like this: the goddess Demeter, who has brought the fruits of the underworld, the plants that grow from seeds out of the earth and come to us and feed us. Now, what is the significance of the initiatic mystery schools in human spiritual history? I've given you a printable document that will answer questions about this, and I think it's worth reading. Even though it was written very early in the last century, it has the kind of research and knowledge about the mysteries is not that much more advanced today than it was then. People then were, many of them, greater classicists than we have here today. So I advise you to print it out and read it. Well, the first significant thing was the development of the individual soul. People were now, in the mystery religions, a very small percentage of the population that was considered to be worthy to be invited to become initians and then eventually initiates, were those who would develop their own immortal souls. They were transformed from corporate beings into individuated human beings. And this was a rather scarce commodity in the ancient world. It was significant because this transformation from human into divine, which we call apotheosis, was something that before had been only something that was attributed to great rulers and kings like Pharaoh, or that later became attributed to his close relatives and so on. The next important and significant point is that it is ethical and mystical. The mystical and the ethical were tied together. You couldn't buy salvation. When someone who was as tainted as the Roman Emperor Caligula wanted to be initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries, the priest of Eleusis simply said no. He simply didn't have the character and the integrity for it, and he didn't dare go in with his troops and tear the place down because his troops would have rebelled and destroyed him. So moral living, character development, and the sacred gnosis and understanding that was required for apotheosis was linked permanently and in great integration with the ethics and character of the person who would become invited to be initiated. The next thing is that those who were considered to be worthy became part of a spiritual aristocracy, a kind of a hierarchy. They were expected to develop their leadership and their service in society. And remember, this is by invitation only. So new initiations were recruited only by existing initiates. And they were considered to be, once initiated, saints in a profane world. We are called to mind the statement attributed to Mar Yeshua, the Master Jesus, "You are the salt of the earth." So the idea was that these initiates were there not only to just advance themselves, they were there to bring about the advancement of the world. And it was very important for them to keep silence about everything, not to give holy things to the dogs, do not give your pearls to the swine, lest they turn again and rend you. These are statements that are attributed to the Master Jesus. Holy silence. They did not speak about these things. And in over 3,000 years of the Eleusinian mysteries, before they were finally abandoned, or rather destroyed by the emerging church state of Christianity, so little was ever leaked about the mysteries and the rituals of Eleusis that today we know very, very little. Very little was ever said. None of the initiates ever blabbed. So here we have a replica of a statue indicating sacred silence, what the Greeks called sige. Here he holds one finger to his lips and says, "Keep it to yourself. Do not reveal the mysteries that you have and the sacred things that you have received, because they are sacred and they must not be profaned." And you find this attitude maintained all the way through Christianity. Here is a painting of St. Peter with his finger to his lips, indicating holy silence about the inner things that have been taught. So where are we now? Why are we studying these things? How much is being revealed about these things? Well, very little, because we don't know a lot, but we know much more than we did before. Why are we interested? Because spiritual initiation is an attempt to create a spiritual breakthrough for individuals and for society. And this was the goal of all past initiation, because one couldn't do it by oneself. By oneself alone, to make the kind of transition from the mortal to the immortal, to bridge that great abyss, was not simply possible. I'd like to make an analogy. When we have water, we heat water, and it gets warmer and warmer. It takes about 1 calorie to raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree centigrade. Well, from 0 degrees centigrade to 100 degrees centigrade is the range of water until it finally boils away. But the interesting thing is, when you get to the last degree, when you want to boil away, it no longer requires just 1 calorie per gram of water to actually change state from a water into a gas. It requires 540 calories of heat to make that 1 gram of water be able to escape from the surface tension of the water and to become steam, to change its state. And this is analogous to what happens in initiation, because people make very strong efforts by themselves. You don't see a water raising its temperature. You turn on the water and it gets warmer and warmer and warmer. The only way you can go home and know how much warmer it's getting is by looking at a thermometer. You don't know anything is happening until it finally starts to boil. But there is a great deal happening from 1 degree to 2 degrees to 3 degrees to 4 degrees. The temperature is raising, but nothing is seen, nothing is manifest. It's all very internal. But when you finally reach the state of boiling, how do you make the leap? Very simply, it requires much more energy than the individual has to make that transition. It requires the spiritual energy of initiation. And that is the power of lineage, the power of hierarchy, the power of many other souls lifting you up and bringing you from that one state into that higher state. And that is basically the analogy of how the individual makes that spiritual breakthrough. He cannot do it by himself. He needs to be in the care and nurture and help of those who guide him, that are both in the body and out of the body. Now, there is also another analogy that has been used. Barbara Marx Hubbard has talked about humanity reaching a critical mass, and it was the concept that was brought through social initiation, for example, in Freemasonry. The idea that as more individuals reach this critical state and are able to make the transition, the easier it becomes for society as a whole to make that transition. So, as more individuals achieve a higher state, there is a kind of leavening effect in society. So, those who went through initiation were supported for this kind of spiritual breakthrough by support groups and webs of initiatic group energies, what was called the Brotherhood of the Ogdoad, lineages, brotherhoods and sisterhoods, and common striving. And so that is why lineage and why often authority and authenticity in an initiatic tradition are absolutely necessary. We just can't lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Now, in modern times, in the 21st century, many different people have been inspired and have received guidance to take the important elements of the ancient mysteries and what we call the Grail paths into a higher octave, into a new way of expression in a way that is important for humanity in this stage of its development, in this spiritual age. And I myself have been very involved in this kind of. I recommend some of the following mystery schools, and there are many others that have done this sort of thing and are not just looking back into the past, but are taking from the past in order to build relevant new technologies for people to make these kinds of changes as we move into the future. Some of these are Pan-Sophic, male-female Freemasonry, the Great Western Brotherhood in San Francisco, Temple of the Holy Grail, some of the chivalric orders, like the Order of the Teaching and Healing Order of St. Michael and St. Raphael, which is a chivalric order, various kinds of Rosicrucian revivals. Temple of the Holy Grail is something that I'm going to mention a few times throughout this presentation because it is something that I'm very closely working with and am Grand Master of, and I know is a powerful and important element of modern mystery tradition.